and welcome to another episode of All About Down Base. Now today's video is going to be my city rubble base, and the idea behind this is that it's a little bit of a collapsed building. So you've got like the concrete slab that's broken and cracked, and then we've got the rebar sticking out from the sides as well, so you can really see that it looks like a piece of a collapsed building. Now, I've used quite a few new techniques in this that I've never used before. So this was a really fun base to make actually as well. And just to let you know as well, if the video is a little bit all over the place and it seems like I'm a bit hesitant in parts, it's because normally I make a prototype of all my bases before I start filming the video. But I was quite limited on time for this video. So this is the first attempt ever at making this base. So let's head to the table and I will see you in a bit. All you need to start is a piece of cork that's roughly the same size as your base and some small pieces of hobby wire. This is 1.5mm hobby wire from eBay. And then all I'm doing here is I'm just taking a pair of hobby pliers and I'm just squeezing the wire gently to kind of try and give it that authentic rebar look. Once that's been done, all you need is a hobby drill with a bit that is the same thickness as the hobby wire. And what you need to do is just drill through from one edge to the other, making sure you go all the way through. And then I'm just dry fitting a piece of wire here. Now obviously you can see that piece is too short, but it's the right thickness and it's a nice tight fit. So I drilled 2 more holes and put 2 more pieces through. And you don't have to be very accurate with this because it's meant to look like it's collapsed. So all I'm doing now is I'm just kind of bending it and breaking it to try and give it that authentic crumbled look. And what I found was that the metal hobby wire bends nice and easily to allow you to bend the cork, but it's not very easy to actually rip it and break it. So I took out my trusty hobby knife and discovered that if I cut and scraped a few bits away, it actually really helped and it gave it a more authentic look, a bit more of what I was going for. So all you need to do is just keep going with that. You can bend the wire, you can cut out extra pieces and maybe just add a few little scratches for texture, however you want. And then once you are happy with that, you just need to start working on the base itself. So to begin with, we're going to use my trusty friend, the Vallejo white pumice, and just going to put a relatively thin layer of that all over the base. And again, you don't have to be very neat with this. Just make sure that you cover the entire base and go all the way up to the edges and just scrape off any excess that you don't need. Once that's done, you're going to just take a small amount of random mixed up stones and gravel and sand, any little kind of bits and pieces that you've got laying around, and mix them all together. And then just press that down into the white pumice and then do your Taylor Swift and shake it off. Once that's dried, all I did was super glue the concrete slab on top of it and then primed it in Citadel's Mechanicus Standard Grey. What I did next was to take some Citadel lead belcher, and all you can see me doing here is just applying a little bit of that onto my hobby wire just to make it look metallic again, because obviously the Mechanicus Standard Grey paint had really dulled it down. So just trying to make that a little bit more realistic again with the silver paint. And just make sure you get the little bits in the middle as well if you've done like I've done and scraped away any of the cork. Once that's dry, the next step is to take some Citadel Typhus Corrosion, and we're just going to gently dot this on using an old brush just to give those metal rods a little bit of an aged and rusty look. So I'm not being too liberal with this, I'm just putting a little bit of it on each part of the hobby wire. And then we want to make it look a bit more like real rust, so we're going to use some Citadel Riser Rust. But rather than dry brushing this on, because the area is so small, I'm actually using a tiny stipple brush. And I'm kind of doing a combination of dry brushing and stippling. And you can see there that anywhere I got a little bit too much on, I'm just rubbing that in with my finger. And it's actually creating a really cool rusty effect that's quite realistic. I quite like this. And as you can see, I forgot to glue my hobby wire in place, so as I'm painting it, it is moving around, but not to worry if that happens. It adds to the realism, I think. So once you are happy with your rust effect, you just need to leave that to dry for a minute or two before moving on to this next step. Now, this next step is entirely optional. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. If you like the look of the raw cork, feel free to leave it. But this is AK Interactive Asphalt. Now, as you can see, I'm giving this a really good stir because it does separate massively in the tub. And it's a very strange product. It's very gloopy and thick. I've never really used anything like it before, but I do like it for these kind of projects. So all I'm doing is using a very old brush here, and I'm just kind of dabbing this asphalt on wherever there's cork. And that, again, is just personal preference because I prefer the look of this to the bare cork. Now, ideally, I probably would have preferred something a little bit lighter here. So AK Interactive do another one of these that is concrete, which is lighter than the asphalt one, but I don't actually have any of that at the moment. But this is a good experiment for me because it shows me that the product itself and the consistency and everything works really well for this. So I will probably buy some of the concrete one just to make it a little bit lighter. Now, as you can see, I'm being quite careful with this not to get any on the rebar, but I was trying to make sure I got it into all the nooks and crannies there. The next step is to apply a very, very liberal coating of Agrax Earthshade, and for this, you're literally going over everything. Over the concrete, over your rebar, and over the base, making sure you get right underneath everything and make sure everything gets a good soaking in the wash. And then you just need to leave that to dry for a few hours maybe to make sure that it's completely dry before we move on to the next step. Now, what we want to do now is kind of try and lighten this up and make some of the details pop. So we're going to start with some Skaven Blight Dinge, and I'm just putting a tiny little blob of that onto my kitchen roll. And then I'm taking a nice big dry brush and I'm going to do a really heavy dry brush all over the base, but trying not to hit the rebar, just because we've already got that nice rusty effect. We don't want to affect that too much. So I'm just going over everywhere with the Skaven Blight Dinge just to start picking out some of those raised areas. And you can see as you apply each of these dry brushing layers what effect it has, and it really does start to bring out all the details very quickly. So once you've done your Skaven Blight Dinge, you move on to a slightly lighter colour. So for this we're going to use Dawnstone. And again, just a little blob on your kitchen roll, and using the same dry brush, doesn't matter if there's still some of the last colour on there. And again, a nice heavy dry brush all over. And you can see now as well that the details are really starting to pop out on this. Now, I always do my dry brushes in gradual stages just for this very reason, that it just gradually starts to bring the details out. And don't matter if you get any of this on the base beneath, because that just all adds to the effect as well. And then once you're happy with that, we're going to move on to the final dry brush step, which is the Administratum Grey. Now, this is a very light grey, but again, I'm not going to be careful with it. I am going to do quite a heavy dry brush with this colour as well. And again, you don't have to clean your brush out in between. It actually helps the kind of the gradual steps between the colours if you leave some of the last paint on your brush. But you can see here that it really is starting to look like concrete, like rock now. Now with the really pale one, I am putting a tiny little touch of that onto each of the bits of rebar, just to kind of give a slightly kind of dusty effect. It just helps again with the realism. So once you finish with your dry brush, you could leave it there if you wanted to, but I wanted to go a little step further. So I'm now using AK Interactive Mud Splatter Effect, and it looks like chocolate sauce. But I'm just taking a tiny little bit on the tip of an old brush and dabbing that around the base underneath my kind of concrete slab. And it's just to kind of add a little bit more colour and a little bit more of a natural feel to it. Putting a little bit onto the actual concrete itself, but again, that's completely up to you whether you want to do this at all. And next, just to add a bit more colour, I went for some MIG Nature Effects, some slimy, grimy green, and I'm just going to drop a few bits of that onto the base with a pipette. And here's the finished result. So there you go, that is my City Rubble base. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel, and that way you'll be notified when I release more content. Now, I'll be back soon with another video, and I'm hopefully going to be starting my new series on terrain very soon, so keep an eye out for that, and until then, happy hobbying.